Hi, I'm Michael McCoy, and as host of the Dream Gardens TV show for ABC TV, and now the author of a book of the same, also called Dream Gardens, and due for release on the 30th of November, I had the amazing opportunity to speak to each of the designers of the gardens that were included in the TV show and have also been included in the book. And one of those designers was Paul Bangay. Now, there's no bigger name in garden design in Australia, so it was a fabulous opportunity to speak to Paul about his design process and specifically around the garden that we featured in Strath Creek of his on the TV show and now in the book. Now, the great thing is with this is that you can therefore have this multimedia experience of watching the episode on TV, reading the chapter about it in the book, and then looking at YouTube to follow up on more detail of the interview that I did with the designer pertaining to the episode that you're interested in. So I hope you enjoyed this chat with Paul Bangay. I certainly did. Hey, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Paul, I'm really interested in your approach on this site. There was a garden already on this site.
Yeah.
And a garden that had been actually open at times to the local community.
Yeah.
But what was it that you immediately saw that it really needed?
I think probably the thing that attracted me to it, and this is the thing that needed, but the really beautiful part of that site was the fact it was a house sitting on top of a hill, right on the precipice. Like, I love this notion, and I've got it here at Stonefields, where you sit on top of a hill and there's this big drop in front of you, so that you can have this garden that sort of focuses your view. Like, you can run gardens down the sides and let the view be the hero, not the garden be the hero. And for me, that's just magical. If a garden feels like it's floating in space or sitting on the top of a hill and letting some distant view be the major focal point, that's my ideal site. So this had that.
So it was primarily a missed opportunity, and I guess for a lot of your work, you would be walking in on sites where there is an existing garden.
Yeah.
And do you find that it is mostly about not so much what's wrong or inherently faulty about what's there, other than simply missed opportunity?
We try, and like, I find it, I don't know what you're like, but I find it very difficult when there's a garden there. I'd much rather go to a virgin site, like a greenfield site. I'd much prefer that. I mean, maybe with the odd good tree, that's always a big bonus, but it's always hard when you come into an established garden, and that was an established garden, because people they sort of hang on to things and they become emotional about things, even when they're wrong. Like, quite often I find the scale's wrong, the proportions are wrong, the spaces are all wrong. And to try and fix that means you've really got to get in there and do some big changes. And people sometimes are reluctant to do that. and the other thing I find really frustrating, and you probably know this as well, is you can have trees and they're obviously too close together. And there's one that could be absolutely beautiful, and there's one that's a bit sort of iffish, and it's stopping the one that's going to be really beautiful growing into something fabulous. And they won't let you pull out the one that's making it, like, holding it back. Like, it's just crazy. But so I'd much rather come to a virgin site, but we quite often get old gardens like that.
Yes, and what it totally changed was both the way the house related to the garden, as well as the garden relating to the bigger surrounds.
Yes.
Would you consider that to be the primary success of any of your designs?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I like to think that we're not sitting as a little island in the middle of the landscape, that we are embracing what's happening out in that landscape. I mean, we're talking about country gardens here. I mean, it's a totally different thing for a city garden. But in country gardens, yeah, we really love embracing what's happening out in that outer landscape. Here at Stonefields, like, for instance, the pool garden, which is the one that faces the view. Like, in spring and winter, it's all green, and so are our paddocks. But then when the paddocks hay off, all our planting scheme and flowering scheme is all those browns and yellows and the same colors as what's happening out in that outer landscape. So, I think it's very successful if you can borrow what's happening out there and bringing it in, or focusing the garden on what's happening out in that landscape. And it's quite a challenge to be able to do that.
Well, regarding that challenge, what do you find to be the biggest challenges when you're working with really big views? I know at times I've been in situations where there's been 360-degree views. We're right on the top of a hill, and a client will simply not allow me to close down any part of that 360-degree view. Yeah. What do you find to be the biggest challenges of designing a garden in a really vast, scaled setting?
Well, I think you need intimacy in a garden. I think you need intimate moments within a garden, and so you do need to enclose some of those spaces. Like, I would find that enormously challenging. I think you're much better at that than me. That beautiful rockery, that old quarry garden you did is just superb. I mean, that's not enclosed on any sides, really, is it? But I find that garden really beautiful. So well done there. But I think that I would try and convince them that you do need some areas that are closed off. And because when you sit on top of a hill, you've got wind. You always inevitably have wind. So you need spaces that are protected from the wind. And that's what a good garden does. It protects you. It creates beauty, but it also provides you with protection. And I think that's vital.
And also, it feels to me like there is such an important... that framing is such an important part of amplifying the power of a view. Yeah. And if it is not allowed to be interrupted at any point, then you have this kind of this diffusion and dispersion of the focus, and at your place, not only do you have the wings of planting down right and left, but the pool creates an outward pointing, a finger pointing outwards saying, look out here. And certainly in the Strath Creek garden, you've got the wings of the perennial planting that close in quite close. They pull it right in. It really does create quite a narrow little exit.
Really funnels your view, doesn't it? Yeah. That's a consequence of it not sitting on a platform. It was very hard to create a very wide platform there. And it also comes back to scale. Like, it's not an enormous house. It's still very much a cottage. And so you don't want to sit a cottage in a big, vast expanse. But you do tours of gardens, and I think the Italians do this the absolute best. They plonk houses and gardens on top of hills and create this lovely funneling of views and in intimate spaces around there and places to sit and enjoy the view. Don't you find they do it the absolute best?
Yeah, actually, it's never occurred to me the difference between, nearly all old houses in Australia were situated to protect against the ravages of wind, etc., and therefore were nestled down, often near a water source, down near a creek or something somewhere. Whereas certainly in Italy, and you think about places in Tuscany, it was all about fortification. Those buildings on the top of a hill. But it hadn't really occurred to me that there was that sort of cultural difference of one nation building on the top and the other nation building down in the valley.
Yeah, you're right. We used to locate houses close to water. Yes. And then as we developed it, then it was close to power. And that's why you find a lot of houses close to the road. You've got all these lovely vast paddocks they could build in with beautiful views, and they're plonked next to the road because they want close to the power source.
Of course. That's true. So what are the specific challenges of pool fencing in an environment where you've got really big views?
It is getting increasingly more difficult to be able to do this. It used to be that you could put a 1200 barrier around the pool, and that's all you had to do. But now there's all sorts of rules about how close a hedge can be to it, whether it's on the inside or the outside. There's different measurements. You can't use the house to isolate the pool anymore. So you've got to have so what I'm finding now is to put a pool in the middle of a view line with a distant view is really quite difficult, especially if it's looking from the house. So we tend to set the pools off to the side now so we can properly enclose them with a pool fence, and that fence is not impacting your view line, because it's almost near impossible. You used to be able to do a pool and have a 1200 drop at the end and then look at the view. Well, now we've got a balustrade issue where they say that's that's more than a metre drop. So you need some sort of balustrade at the end. So there's just too many complexities, and it's getting more and more complex all the time. So I find it easier to tuck the pool to the side and fence it properly and sort of hide that fencing.
Yes, and you know, I have I've always been in two minds about glass fencing. As one, on one hand, thinking, look, in many cases it's the best and possibly the only option,
Yeah.
but it's never quite as invisible or as transparent as
No.
everybody hopes, is it?
No. And the problem, especially in the countryside, we're talking about a country garden, but the problem is the birds fly into them and can kill themselves. You know, they get dirty. People hate cleaning them. You know, we are favouring the very vertical, just the vertical steel droppers now, just the vertical steel lines, and getting them as thin as you can, and avoiding horizontals if you can. I find that, and let the soft plants, non-climbable plants, which is very subjective to the building surveyor as well, but letting those sort of spill through them a little bit. That I think is the most transparent fence you can do.
Yes, I find that really interesting. The kind of difference between transparent visual transparency and a kind of psychological transparency, because just because a piece of glass you can see through doesn't mean that it doesn't send you very strong messages of you can't pass here. Whereas a row of vertical rods might be actually more visible, but somehow more friendly in a way, kind of less, you know, it's a strange effect.
And it creates a feeling that you can pass through them easier, I think, because the plants are seen to be moving through them. Whereas with glass, a plant just goes straight up hard against it. So it's very obvious you cannot go past that. But like with the vertical bars, you can get things moving through them. The plants I think that gives you a feeling of space better than
and there's the same curious outcome for me with farm fencing, that people think that wire fencing is virtually invisible and therefore gives you the greatest sense of non-interruption. Whereas to me, a chunky post and rail fence, it is much more visible, but because you can stick your foot in and jump over it and you know you could anywhere, it has an altogether more friendly feel than a few strands of barbed wire.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I mean, go for the ha-ha. That's what I say.
Every time.
That wins every time for me.
Every time, for sure. Yeah. Now, when I turned up for the revisit at Strath Creek, the perennial borders were just looking amazing. And I was really astonished. You know, my immediate thought was of the complexity of those. And then I was so astonished just to hear that there were only 9 plants total in those perennial beds.
Yeah.
Is that kind of limitation of diversity, is that something that you habitually attempt to achieve? Are you tempted to jam a whole lot of other things in? It doesn't feel like restraint is necessarily challenging for you. But I'm really interested in how inherently simple those borders actually are.
Well, I mean, I like repetition in a border. You know, but I'd love the idea of diversity in the border, but I just can't seem to get my brain to do it. It's really weird. So, you know, I come up, like you say, with 9 plants or 11 plants that I know. And the other thing is you want to come up with a palette of plants that you know are going to do well, and that you know the client's going to be able to grow. And quite often diversity doesn't allow you to do that, because there's some plants that might need a little bit more nurturing than others. But yeah, I mean, I tend to come up with blocks of plants that get repeated throughout the design. It gives you a lot of impact, and I get a lot of joy and drama and impact from simplicity. I think repetition of blocks of things creates simplicity, and that just brings harmony to the garden. But that's not to say I don't like diversity of borders. I mean, look what Piet Oudolf does, and I just go, I mean, he's just a genius how he sort of does that huge diversity of plants and the colors and the merging, and there's nothing clashing, and all at the right height. And I just find that mind-boggling how someone manages to pull that off.
Absolutely. And look, and there are times when I find a lot of the best of that kind of naturalistic planting kind of unnecessarily diverse in being almost indulgently diverse, when there certainly comes a point where you just go, more is not more, actually, you know. But certainly the best of those practitioners, you just can't fault the that
No.
the fact that diversity never looks like cacophony. You know, it
Yeah.
still looks unified, and
It
and
does.
yeah, that's
And I don't know how that's a real art. I mean, that's just pure genius. The other thing is though, that in Europe, where they're creating these gardens, it's much easier to grow things like in Australia. And we found that at Strath Creek. I mean, the soil's bad. We don't have much water. It's super windy. So you're not going to come up with a big palette of plants that are going to take all those harsh conditions. So we
No.
really did refine it down to ones that were super tough that we knew would grow there.
Right. Over the time of your designing life, you've gone very much from a kind of green on green designer through to exploring quite a diverse, a very enormously diverse range of plants, and really celebrating color.
Yeah.
But I imagine then that the maintenance demand of your gardens has changed a lot over that as a consequence of that.
Yeah. And this is a real misconception in gardening. Like, you do a very formal garden that's just green on green and is clipped, dead easy to look after, doesn't take much maintenance to look after it. It's really weird. Everyone looks and goes, well, that's going to take a lot of work. I mean, our parterres here get clipped once a year, and it takes the boys, like 2 people, like a week to do. That's it. We don't touch them ever again. But what it's like, borders, you're constantly cutting things back, staking things, cutting them down to the ground in winter, letting them come up, lifting them, dividing them, rearranging them because you've got them in the wrong spot. So I think that, the more flowery, the more pretty, the more diverse it is, the harder the maintenance is on them, I find. But I think, you're right. I started off green on green. It's really a consequence of how long I've been bloody well going for, because
when
I started in the early 80s, formality was absolutely everything. So, I followed a few garden fashions along the line of my career, which is...
Well, you've created a few.
Hopefully. Nice.
And so, but I think that what interests me is, therefore, given the demand associated with perennial planting, and even though there are only 9 plants used in the borders, that's not to say that is a simple border. That is quite a bit of complexity and a lot of thinking going on there to get your heights right and to make sure that there's a degree of overlap in flowering time and all those kind of things. But do you then find that that the ability to find people to maintain gardens knowledgeably starts to impede your design ability?
Oh, it does. I mean, and it's getting harder and harder. I don't know what it is about Australia, but there's a great skill shortage when it comes to really great, informed, educated gardeners, don't you find? I mean, there's lots out there that can, do paths and lawns and all those sort of things, but the skill set's really short on when it comes to looking after perennials and more specialized plants like that. So it does limit what we do. I mean, a lot of people go, we can't find the gardener, so let's cut back the size of the garden, or let's cut back the skills that are needed to look after this garden. Let's try and make it a bit simpler, because we can't simply find the people, and that's getting more difficult, not easier. I don't know why. As people are embracing gardens more through COVID. Everyone's taken to gardens, but we're not finding the gardeners to look after them.
No, it's a really interesting conundrum. I've been approached in the last 2 years, I reckon, by more younger people saying, I want to be a maintenance gardener. I want to maintain gardens, and I want to maintain complex, sophisticated gardens. And it's the first time I've ever had people saying that that's what they want to do, and that their gardening life is not just a step towards designing. These people who say, I want to be a career maintenance gardener. So I wonder if there is some hope for the future, but at the same time, I think it probably has something to do with how much these people can charge and the perception of value on behalf of the client. And this is where someone like you, of course, can have such influence, knowing that that in designing these gardens of complexity, then the assumption is that there is a great sense of value for that which you've designed and installed, and therefore will automatically be a value for the people who can look after it. But maybe that's an unfair assumption on my behalf.
No. I think that's the part that is getting better. I think clients and owners of these gardens are realizing that they do need maintenance and are prepared to do it. I find like 20 years ago, people were really, a garden is something that, you know, we have to have. It's something, an element we have to have, but I don't want to spend much money looking after it. You know, I want to look good, but I don't want to spend a lot of money looking after it. Now I'm quite, you know, and I used to, one of the first questions I used to ask clients was, how much maintenance are you prepared to do? And 20 years ago, nearly everybody says no, as simple as possible, low maintenance. Now I'm getting lots of clients are going, no, we're happy for maintenance. We're happy for, you know, to be involved in this, and we're happy for change, and we're happy for, you know, getting as many people as we can to look after this garden, because that's what creates a beautiful garden.
Isn't that great to hear from Paul, some of his thoughts about the way maintenance is changing, the way his clients are thinking about maintenance, but also that thing about the position of the swimming pool and how much that's changed as a consequence of the current codes and the perfectly valid and important codes around swimming pool safety. But this is only one of several interviews of the designers involved in the Dream Gardens book, so press subscribe so you don't miss out on any of them as they're released.